welcome to another Warhammer 40,000 battle report brought to you by the Legion Wargaming. Today we are on the planet of Tarak 4, an isolated world in the Thraxis subsector, home to a couple of 100,000 hardy miners and pioneers. But this planet has recently acquired some new residents. The first is a known enemy of the Imperium, known only as the Father of Illumination. He is a powerful psyker and trafficker with demons, responsible for widespread heretical cult activity across this subsector. The Ordo Malleus have tracked him to this world, and their chamber militant are preparing to deliver the ultimate sanction. Unfortunately for the Imperium, this world's other new residents are the Orks, pouring forth from the neighbouring systems in a huge migration and overrunning many of the worlds of Thraxis. But the Knights of Titan have been charged with apprehending a known servant of the ruinous powers, and if the greenskins stand in their path, then they too will be purged by bolter, blade and holy fire. The battle today is 1,850 points. It is Grey Knights versus Orks, an eternal war mission. It is the Relic with Vanguard strike deployment, and today the Relic is the Father of Illumination himself. He is waiting anxiously at this landing facility for some of his cult followers to rescue him from this world. But the Grey Knights are on the way. Let's take a look at the armies. This 1,850 point Orc army is battleforged and consists of a single combined arms detachment led by a war boss, and he is riding the renowned war boss Gazbag's Blitzbike. He also has a power claw. There is a second HQ choice, which is a Painboy. He is riding an Orc warbike as well. And this attachment has two troops choices. The first is a mob of 20 shooter boys. They are led by a Nob with a boss pole and a power claw. And the second troops choice is a mob of 20 slugger boys, also led by a Nob with a boss pole and a power claw. This army contains three elite choices. The first are the war boss's personal retinue, the Bad Moon Bikers. We have 6 Nobs mounted on Orc war bikes, and 4 of them have power claws. They are looking very mean indeed. The second elite choice is a mob of 10 burners. They are mounted in a truck. And the final elite choice is a mob of 9 tank busters. They are led by a Nob with a power claw, and they are mounted in a truck. The Orks have brought along some air power today. As a fast attack choice, we have a Blitzer bomber, and the Orks also have 3 heavy support choices. The first is a battle wagon to carry the sluggers into battle. The second is a mob of 12 looters, and the final choice is a mob of 3 killer cans, all with rocket launchers. These are the Orks. They do not care about heresy or demonology. They are just running riot over the surface of this world. Will the Grey Knights be able to overcome them? Let's see what the Knights of Titan have brought along. This 1,850 point Grey Knights army is battleforged and is a single Nemesis Strike Force detachment led by 2 HQ choices, which are a Grand Master and a Librarian, upgraded to Mastery level 3. This detachment contains 4 troop choices. The first is a strike squad of 5 Grey Knights. 3 of them have Nemesis Force halberds and 1 has an incinerator. And the second troop choice is also a strike squad. Again, we have 5 Grey Knights. 3 of them have halberds and 1 has an incinerator. The third troop choice is a squad of Terminators. 3 of them have Force halberds. The Justicar has a Nemesis Force stave and 1 Terminator has an incinerator. And the fourth and final troops choice in this detachment is another squad of Terminators. They all have Nemesis Force swords and 1 brother has a Psi cannon. This army contains 2 elite choices, the first of which is a squad of 3 Paladins, all 3 of whom have twin Nemesis Falchions, and the second elite choice is a squad of 5 Purifiers. They will be mounted in this detachment's first fast attack choice, which is a Storm Raven gunship with twin-linked heavy bolters and twin-linked assault cannon. And we also have another fast attack choice in the form of a squad of 7 Interceptors. The Justicar has a Demon Hammer. There are 3 Nemesis Force halberds, another Demon Hammer, 1 stave and 1 incinerator. And the final unit in this force is a heavy support choice. It is a Nemesis Dreadnought with a personal teleporter, a Nemesis Greatsword and a Gatling silencer. These are the Grey Knights. They have been charged by the Ordo Malleus with apprehending a known servant of the ruinous powers. They are not going to let the Orks prevent them from doing their sworn duty. At least that's the plan as we move into deployment. And the armies have deployed with the Grey Knights using a tactic we have seen them use before. They have left their entire army in reserve. They are planning a Nemesis strike to snatch the heretic. This plan can go very badly, or it can be very effective. We shall see. Meanwhile, in the landing facility, the renegade psyker is cursing the lateness of his incompetent minions as he hears behind him the sound of crude engines and even cruder bellowing as the Orks have arrived. Over on their left flank we have the tank busters moving forward in their truck, and the looters behind them have wasted no time in setting up a great firing position on these rocky outcrops. In the centre, the shooter boys and the killer cans are approaching the outer defences of the landing facility, and to their right we have a battle wagon lumbering forward, crammed with more Ork boys. To the right of the battle wagon we have the burners moving forward in their truck, and on the far right flank of the Ork advance we have the war boss and his bikers. They have also been joined by the pain boy. There are a lot of Orks and no Grey Knights just yet. The Grey Knights have the first turn. The Orks have decided not to try to seize initiative, so we go into Grey Knights turn 1. Start of Grey Knights turn 1, and they made an average set of reserve rolls. 5 out of their 8 units have arrived, but they have been lucky with their deep striking as they have not suffered any mishaps, which is amazing given how close to the Ork lines the Grey Knights decided to teleport. On the far right we have one strike squad. It has an incinerator. Looks like it is going to unleash it over the tank busters in their truck, and perhaps even some of the shooter boys, and the interceptors who have appeared next to the strike squad seem to have the same idea. One squad of terminators with a psi cannon has deep struck. It looks like they plan to hold back the Ork advance in the centre along with the second squad of terminators. They scattered. They wanted to unleash their incinerator over the shooter boys, but they can still run. They may be able to do it. And the final Grey Knight unit to arrive is the Nemesis Dreadnought, who scattered back from the centre of the landing facility to appear on this landing pad. The heretic cannot believe it. He was expecting a rescue shuttle, and instead he now faces the towering form of the Dreadnought. In reserve, the Grey Knights still have their Grandmaster and their Librarian, who have joined the Paladins, one strike squad, and the Purifiers in the Storm Raven. There is no movement since all of the Grey Knights have arrived by deep strike. We go straight into Grey Knights Psychic Phase turn 1. End of Grey Knights Psychic Phase turn 1, and the Grey Knights were disappointed that neither their Grandmaster nor their Librarian arrived at the start of this turn. They were hoping that those two powerful Psychers could do some serious damage to the Orks, but they have still had a successful first Psychic Phase. They had 8 warp charges, and the Dreadnought started off by putting Sanctuary on himself, which the Orks failed to deny. He then followed it up, channeling Force into his Gatling silencer, and with the remaining dice, both squads of Terminators have successfully put Hammer Hand on themselves. No damage yet to the Orks. Let's see if that changes in Grey Knight Shooting Phase turn 1. End of Grey Knight Shooting Phase turn 1, and the strike squad ran into the cover of this rocky outcrop, then unleashed their incinerator and their storm bolters into the shooter boys. They managed to cut down 5, but their incinerator washing over the truck containing the tank busters had no effect on the Ork vehicle or its occupants. The interceptors then ran forward and unleashed their incinerator and storm bolters against the looters. They managed to cut down 4 of the Orks, but once again this truck was unharmed as the incinerator washed over it, as were the tank busters. Maybe the Orks have managed to scrounge some ceramite plating for this ramshackle vehicle. More shooter boys were cut down by Stormbolter and Psy Cannon fire from this squad of Terminators who have advanced to man the barricades, and another 5 were taken out as the other squad of Terminators advanced and targeted them as well. The shooter boys looked like they were going to run until the Knob cracked another one over the head with his power claw, and they have held thanks to mob rule. Meanwhile, the Nemesis Dread Knight is very disappointed as the volley from here's Gatling silencer only managed to inflict a single wound on the Knob bikers, and it was saved. This deadly Orc unit has been unharmed, and the Grey Knights are disappointed as, with no assaults, that brings their first turn to a close. They have failed to achieve first blood with their alpha strike. Let's see how the Orcs respond going into Orks Turn 1. End of Orcs movement phase turn 1, and the Orc tide has reacted swiftly to the incursion of the Grey Knights. The looters have held position preparing to give fire, but some very angry and singed tank busters have disembarked from their truck. They are going to launch a hail of rockets and then charge into the Grey Knights. The few remaining shooter boys have been ordered forward by their Knob. They are going to give fire and charge as well. The killer cans, piloted as they are by cowardly grots, have held position. They're going to give fire with their rocket launchers, and the Orcs are hoping to destroy this squad of Terminators in short order as the entire mob of Slugger boys have disembarked from their battle wagon that has rumbled forwards, and they are preparing to charge. Meanwhile, the heretic has had to do a hasty dive for cover into the bunker as approaching come the whooping Knob warbikers. They have their eyes on a big shiny target, and the warboss cannot wait to clamp his power claw around it. Meanwhile, the burners have moved up a couple of inches in their truck. They are not needed yet. The Orcs look like they are going to launch a devastating counter strike onto the Knights of Titan. With no psychers, we go straight into Orcs shooting phase turn 1. End of Orc shooting phase turn 1, and it is the Greenskins' turn to stare in disbelief as a hail of fire erupted from their lines and did very little. All of the Slugger boys targeted this squad of Terminators, but could not penetrate their Terminator armour, and nor could the killer cans. Meanwhile, a huge volley of fire came in from the remaining looters, joined by the shooter boys. They inflicted plenty of wounds on this squad of Terminators, but once again, not a single Orky bullet could get through the blessed Terminator armour. One Grey Knight has been removed as a casualty on this side of the battlefield as a wildly corkscrewing rocket from the tank busters found its mark, blowing one of the interceptors to bits as they prepare to charge. And there has been one other wound caused as all of the Knob bikers unleashed their twin-link Daka guns. A storm of bullets ploughed in to the Dread Knight, and one managed to inflict a wound, but that is only 2 wounds inflicted in the entire phase. The Orcs are disappointed, but they are much more optimistic about the assault phase. Orcs assault phase turn 1. End of Orcs assault phase turn 1, and the tank busters got a lot more than they bargained for as they charged into the interceptors. 2 of the Orcs were cut down on Overwatch, and another 2 were felled. In the assault before the Orcs got to strike, none of the tank busters did any wounds at all to the interceptors. The interceptor Justicar hefted his demon hammer and issued a challenge, but he could do no damage to the Orc Knob before both he and another brother were ripped apart. That is a drawn combat, and that is not too bad a result for the Orcs. Meanwhile, in the centre, the Slugger boys have achieved first blood. For the Orcs in this game, they came pouring over these barricades. They lost 2 boys to the incinerator on Overwatch, and then they ploughed into the Terminators. The Terminator Justicar issued a challenge, but like the Justicar of the Interceptors, could do no damage, and the Orc Knob tore him to pieces with his power claw. Then the Grey Knights managed to hack apart 4 Slugger boys before the tide of screaming Greenskins dragged them all down. That's a good result. It is first blood to the Orcs. But the phase's most disappointing result was the failure of the Nob bikers to negotiate their way through this part of the landing facility and charge up the landing pad into the Dread Knight. They failed their charge, but at least they took no damage from the Dread Knight's overwatching Gatling silencer. That brings Orks turn 1 to a close. They have first blood. They have the advantage, it seems, but the Grey Knights are expecting reinforcements to arrive as we go into Grey Knights turn 2. Start of Grey Knights turn 2, and the Grey Knights have got exactly the result they wanted, as all of their remaining units in reserve have arrived. The Purifiers have flown in their Storm Raven gunship. Looks like they are lining up for a strafing run on these looters. Meanwhile, behind the main Orc lines, the second strike squad has appeared. That could be problematic for the Orcs. And in the centre of the facility, the Paladins, accompanied by the Grandmaster and the Librarian, have arrived. The Grey Knights are hopeful that with that much psychic might, they should be able to drive all of the Greenskins back from this facility. We shall see. First, we go into Grey Knights movement phase, turn 2. End of Grey Knights movement phase, turn 2, and with the arrival of the Storm Raven and the second strike squad, the first strike squad have decided they will not be needed to take out the remaining looters. They have decided to move and charge in to help the interceptors against the tank busters. Meanwhile, these Terminators have seen their brothers overwhelmed by the tide of slugger boys that have come pouring into this side of the facility. They are marching grimly towards them, and the Nemesis Dread Knight has decided not to let these Orc bikers blitz their way into this side of the facility. He has moved down from the landing pad. He is going to take the fight to them, as the Renegade Psyker wisely decides to keep his head down as the huge war machine stomps past. That is all of the movement. A lot of the Grey Knights just arrive from reserves, or in the case of the Interceptors, are locked in combat. There is a lot more psychic might available to the Grey Knights. Will it make a difference? Let's see as we go into Grey Knight Psychic phase, turn 2. End of Grey Knight Psychic phase, turn 2, and the arrival of the Librarian and the Grandmaster certainly has made a difference. With 15 warp charges, the Grey Knights have got many powers off during this phase. First, the Dread Knight managed to put both Force and Sanctuary on itself, and the Orcs were powerless to deny either power. Then the Librarian summoned up a Flame Breath, incinerating 2 of the Slugger Boys, and another 6 were burnt to a crisp by the rolling, cleansing flame unleashed by the Grandmaster himself. Finally, in preparation for their charge into the Tank Busters, this strike squad have put Force on their Nemesis weaponry. Their Justicar in particular is looking forward to challenging the Orc Nob. The Grey Knights are striking very hard. Let's see if they can follow up a good psychic phase with a good shooting phase. Grey Knight shooting phase, turn 2. End of Grey Knight shooting phase, turn 2, and the Storm Raven managed to gun down 3 of the looters with bursts from its twin-linked assault cannon and its twin-linked heavy bolters. And the newly arrived strike squad ran up the rocky ridge and took out another 4 with their storm bolters and their incinerator. There is only 1 looter left in this gully, but for some reason he refuses to flee. Meanwhile, the Slugger Boys, having lost so many of their mob in the psychic phase, have proven very resilient in the shooting phase, as despite being targeted by this squad of Terminators and the Paladins, they only lost a single Orc boy. And the Dread Knight has had some success with his Gatling silencer. He has managed to inflict instant death on 2 of the Nob bikers. That has made his job a lot easier as he prepares to charge in Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 2. End of Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 2, and the strike squad successfully charged in to the remaining tank busters, but it did not go according to plan, as the Justicar's challenge was accepted by the tank buster Nob, although he got 2 hits with his Nemesis Force Halberd that also had Force activated, neither wounded, and in return the Nob crushed him and another member of his squad. Meanwhile, the combined attacks of the charging strike squad and the Interceptors managed to take out 3 of the tank busters, but the Orcs only lost the combat by 1. They remain locked. Meanwhile, the charging Terminators did the necessary. They have driven off the Slugger boys. Their Justicar challenged a Nob, but neither could hurt the other. It was the normal Terminators that made the difference. They managed to hack down 2 Slugger boys for no loss themselves, and the Nob and the last 2 boys are running for their lives. Meanwhile, the Nemesis Dreadnought ploughed into the Nob bikers, wading through a storm of Overwatch, but taking no damage. He, with 3 mighty swings of his Nemesis Greatsword, dispatched 3 of the Nob bikers. In return, he took 5 wounds from the power fists of the remaining Nob biker and the War Boss, but he managed to make 3 of his saves. He won the combat. He is alive with 1 wound remaining, and the Orks have held as well. We have another ongoing assault, but with the Dreadnought getting to strike first during the next assault phase, it could be very bad news for the Pain Boy and the Ork Warlord. We shall see. That brings Grey Knights turn 2 to a close. There is no doubt about it, they have hit the Orks very hard this turn. How will the ever diminishing Ork Horde respond? We shall see. Orks turn 2. Start of Orks turn 2, and the Orks have received their own aerial reinforcement as the Blitzer bomber comes diving dangerously low over the landing facility. A strange whistling fills the air. We think it may have already unleashed one of its massive bombs. We shall see. Orks movement phase turn 2. End of Orks movement phase turn 2, and the Blitzer bomber did indeed unleash its payload upon these Terminators. A deadly accurate bomb caused this section of hillside to explode in a hail of earth and debris, and 3 of the Grey Knights Terminators were blown to pieces, and the 2 survivors have problems as, motoring past the form of the Slugger boys who have fled off into the countryside, comes the Burners in their truck. The Burners have disembarked, and there are 10 of them ready to unleash their crude flame weapons over these 2 Grey Knights. Meanwhile, the Killer Cans have turned around. They have decided to take on this newly arrived strike squad, and the remaining shooter boys are moving to aid the couple of remaining tank busters against all of these Grey Knights. Meanwhile, the tank busters truck has decided to make a dash for the Grey Knights deployment zone, attempting to achieve line breaker. Perhaps a bit early for that, we shall see. The last looter is still standing strong. He is going to try to take on the Storm Raven, and the Blitzer bomber will probably be opening fire on it with its twin-linked super shooter as well. Meanwhile, the War Boss remains locked in combat along with the last Nob biker and the Pain Boy. The battle wagon is hemmed in. It is not going to move. It may try to give some supporting fire with its big shooter. The Orks could do a lot of damage if things go their way this turn. Let's see. Orks shooting phase turn 2. End of Ork shooting phase turn 2, and not even their mighty Terminator plate could save them from the wall of death unleashed by the Burners. As these 2 Terminators were fried alive inside their armour, the Burners managed to inflict 11 wounds. The Killer Cans were disappointed. They did not manage to get a single hit with their rocket launchers against this strike squad, but they are going to charge in. Meanwhile, the Storm Raven decided not to jink as it was targeted by the Blitzer bomber's twin-linked super shooter. That turned out to be the wrong decision, as the Ork aircraft got 3 hits and managed to roll 2 6s for 2 glances on the Storm Raven, leaving it with only 1 hull point remaining. And when the last remaining looter turned his weapon towards the Grey Knights aircraft, the pilots did decide to jink. They didn't need to in the end, as the 1 hit that the looter got bounced harmlessly from their frontal armour. But that was an impressive display from the pilot of the Blitzer bomber. Meanwhile, this truck has moved flat out. It is trying to skirt around the facility, at least take itself away from the sights of the Storm Raven, and fire from the big shooters on the battle wagon, and the Burners truck did nothing. But that has been quite a good phase for the Orks. Let's see if they can put in a good assault phase. Orks assault phase turn 2. End of Orks Assault Phase Turn 2, and it has been absolute carnage. The Interceptors and the Tank Busters did not manage to do any more wounds to each other, but the charging Shooter Boys made the difference. They lost 2 boys as the Strike Squad struck out with their Nemesis Force halberds, but then the boys and their knob destroyed the entire Strike Squad, leaving just the 3 Interceptors. They tried to flee, but they were caught, and thanks to "and they shall know no fear," they remain locked. But this combat has swung definitively in the favour of the Orks. Meanwhile, the Killer Cans successfully made their charge into the Strike Squad, and although one of them has lost a hull point to a glancing hit from a crack grenade in a flurry of buzzsaws and snapping claws, the entire Strike Squad was wiped out. And the Grey Knights have lost another key unit in the form of the Nemesis Dread Knight. It swung its Nemesis Greatsword twice more, killing the last Knob Biker and the Pain Boy, but that gave the War Boss the opportunity he needed to inflict another 3 wounds with his Power Claw, none of which was saved, and the Dread Knight has crashed to the ground. The Heretic is no doubt relieved to see that, but he is not very happy to be now presented with the form of a snarling Ork War Boss on a massive smoke-belching war bike. This battle has been incredibly bloody. It is only the end of turn 2. How will the Grey Knights respond? We shall see going into Grey Knights turn 3. End of Grey Knights movement phase turn 3, and the Grey Knights really do have very few units left, with the Interceptors locked in assault. The only movement came from the Storm Raven, which disembarked the Purifiers before hovering over onto the landing pad to give supporting fire, and the Paladins, along with the Grandmaster and the Librarian, they are making straight for their target. The Heretic is still there, but they are also looking forward to testing themselves against the monstrous form of the Ork War Boss as well. Let's see if the Grey Knights can tip things in their favour with Psychic Might in Grey Knight Psychic Phase turn 3. End of Grey Knight Psychic Phase turn 3, and the Paladins and the Grandmaster and the Librarian are clearly determined to be the death of this Ork War Boss, as they used all 12 available dice to give themselves Hammer Hand and Force and Sanctuary, thanks to the Grandmaster. The War Boss, he may be mean, but he has a world of pain coming his way. But first, we have Grey Knight Shooting Phase turn 3. End of a very brief Grey Knight Shooting Phase turn 3, and the Storm Raven used power of the Machine Spirit to take out the final looter. With a burst of fire from its twin-linked heavy bolters, it then snapshot its twin-linked assault cannon at the Killer Cans, but had no effect. And with an incredibly accurate volley, the Purifiers have brought this truck's dream of glory to an end. They managed to get 9 hits out of 10 shots with their Storm Bolters and wreck the vehicle in a single volley of fire. The Paladins and the Grandmaster and the Librarian, they have not bothered firing their Storm Bolters. They have force on all of their weaponry. They want to cut this Ork War Boss down as we go into Grey Knights Assault Phase turn 3. End of Grey Knights Assault Phase turn 3, and the Interceptors finally have managed to deal with the Tank Busters. They directed all of their attacks against the Tank Busters, taking out the last boy, and with a swing of his Demon Hammer, one Interceptor finally took out the Tank Buster Knob as well. Then the Shooter Boys did not manage to do any damage with their attacks, but their Knob once again got 3 hits and tore another 2 of the Interceptors to pieces. The Orks lost the combat by 1, but they remain locked, and as long as this Knob is still alive, it looks like it's curtains for these 2 Grey Knights. We shall see. Meanwhile, the Paladins have easily dealt with the Ork War Boss. In fact, the first Paladin who strode towards the Ork managed to deal 3 blows with one of his Falchions and cut the Ork from his saddle. The Ork War Boss did not even get to swing, and they have consolidated. It is not looking good for this Heretic either. Surrounded by 3 Paladins, a Librarian and the Grey Knights Grandmaster. The Grey Knights are Back in the lead, they have Slay the Warlord. They are in possession of the Relic. The Orks only have First Blood, but with so many casualties on both sides, this could still go either way. We can't believe we are only going into Orks Turn 3. End of Orks movement phase turn 3, and the Blitzer bomber has performed another bombing run. Its bomb was not so accurate this time round, only managing to blow one purifier to pieces, but the pilot coaxed his ramshackle aircraft into a near vertical dive and managed to shred another Grey Knight with a burst from his twin-linked super shooter. Meanwhile, the killer cans are marching towards the landing facility, and the burner's now empty truck has smashed through one of the barricades and is moving at high speed. It wants to circumnavigate its way around these bunkers and into the Grey Knight's deployment zone. And the burners themselves have hatched an optimistic scheme. They have all piled into the battle wagon and it has rumbled forwards. They are hoping that if they unleash all of their burners over the paladins, they can burn their way through the humans. Seems optimistic, but we shall see as we go into Orks shooting phase turn 3. End of Orks shooting phase turn 3, and as the truck moves flat out, bumping and scraping its way over these rocky rises, the 3 killer cans unleash their rockets against the Storm Raven. They managed a single penetrating hit, but the Storm Raven jinked it. Meanwhile, the burners unleashed a huge wall of flame over the paladins. They managed to inflict 21 wounds, but unluckily for the Orks, only 2 ones were rolled as saves, so a single paladin has fallen. The Orks were hoping for a bit more than that, but any paladin falling is a big loss to the Grey Knights chapter. Let's see if this combat finally resolves in Orks assault phase turn 3. End of Orks assault phase turn 3, and the interceptors have finally all fallen. They did not manage to take out any more shooter boys with their halberd or their hammer. In return, the shooter boys did no damage to them. It was the Knob once again who got another 3 hits with his power claw and tore the 2 remaining interceptors to pieces. These few remaining boys are consolidating towards the facility. That brings Orks turn 3 to a close, and there really are very few forces left. Now the Grey Knights only have 7 Grey Knights and a badly damaged Storm Raven. The Orks have lost lots and lots of boys. They've also lost their war boss, their pain boy. It has been carnage. Let's see if the Grey Knights can finish this off in Grey Knights turn 4. End of Grey Knight's movement phase turn 4, and the Storm Raven has hovered over onto the next landing pad. It is going to give fire, hopefully to destroy this truck with its assault cannon using power of the machine spirit. Meanwhile, the 3 remaining purifiers, they are advancing menacingly on the remaining shooter boys. They may well be preparing cleansing flame, we shall see. And the paladins, the librarian and the Grandmaster, dragging the heretic along with them, are preparing to deal with the burners in their battle wagon as we go into Grey Knight Psychic phase turn 4. End of Grey Knight Psychic phase turn 4, and with 14 dice the Grey Knight set about making the most of them. The purifiers started by summoning cleansing flame. The Orks desperately tried to deny it but failed. In the end it wasn't too bad. 2 shooter boys advancing to these barricades were incinerated, and this truck suffered a single glancing hit. That could have been much, much worse, but as the purifiers prepare to charge in and finally deal with the shooter boys' Knob, they have also summoned force into their nemesis Force Swords. Then the paladins, who are preparing to take on the battle wagon, have given themselves hammer hand, and the librarian decided to give the burners a taste of their own medicine, unleashing flame breath, which burned 3 of the Orks from the fighting platform of their vehicle. That could have been more effective, but the Grey Knights think it's enough. Let's see if they can do any more damage in Grey Knight's shooting phase turn 4. End of Grey Knight's shooting phase turn 4, and the purifiers unleashed a hail of bolts from their storm bolters, cutting down the last shooter boy and leaving the Knob to face their charge alone. Meanwhile, this truck has met its end in a hail of assault cannon rounds from the Storm Raven, firing using power of the machine spirit. The Paladins cannot hurt the battle wagon with their storm bolters, but they are hefting their weapons and preparing to charge in Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 4. End of Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 4, and the 3 purifiers made their charge into the knob, and they easily cut him down with their 4 swords before he could swing. Finally, the orc that is responsible for the death of so many of their brothers has been taken down. Meanwhile, the Paladins and the Grandmaster and the Librarian ploughed into the battle wagon, easily carving through its engine and detonating its fuel reserves. The vehicle has exploded, taking out 2 burners, but there are 5 burners left. They refuse to flee. There are precious few orcs left now. It is just the 5 burners, the 3 killer cans, and the Blitzer bomber, but unfortunately it looks like it's heading off into the sunset as we go into Orks turn 4. End of Orks movement phase, turn 4, and the Blitzer bomber has left combat airspace. Even now it is doubtless climbing up into the clouds so that it can perform another diving attack run on this facility. We will see. Meanwhile, the rest of the Orc forces have no choice. They have to concentrate on the Paladins. With the Grandmaster and the Librarian, they need to get the Relic back, and the Burners are preparing to once again unleash their flames over the Terminators, and the Killer Cans are moving as quickly as possible over this side of the facility. They are in charge range, but it's a long one. Let's see if the Orcs can do anything in their 4th shooting phase. End of Orc shooting phase, turn 4, and the Orcs are very happy with their performance as both the Burners and the Killer Cans concentrated their fire on the Paladins containing the Grandmaster and the Librarian. But it is just the Grandmaster and the Librarian left. Both of the remaining Paladins have gone down, one to a ferocious wall of flame launched by the Burners, and another to a rocket fired by the Killer Cans. Both of these Orc units are intending to charge in. They are daring to hope that they can seize this human that the other humans seem to want so much. But the Killer Cans do need a very long charge. Let's see if they can do it. Orcs assault phase, turn 4. End of Orc assault phase, turn 4, and with the roll of an 11, the Killer Cans strode into the fray along with the Burners. Unfortunately for the Cans, the Grandmaster was ready for them, and still under the effect of Hammerhand, he shoved his sword straight through the ramshackle armour of the first walker. The 2 other Killer Cans, they managed to do a couple of wounds, but both were saved by the Grandmaster's iron halo. Meanwhile, the Burners scrabbled desperately against the Librarian's armour. They managed to inflict a few wounds, but none could penetrate. In return, he smashed a Burner with his force stave. The Grey Knights won the combat, but the Burners refused to flee. The Killer Cans are still there as well. So, as we go into Grey Knights turn 5, it looks very much like the Knights of Titan are in control. Let's see what they do. Grey Knights turn 5. End of Grey Knight's movement phase, turn 5, and the 3 remaining purifiers are moving as quickly as they can towards their Grandmaster and their Librarian, but realistically they are a fair distance away still across the landing facility. Meanwhile, the Storm Raven, which is still hovering, has moved off the landing pad. Looks like it is going to move flat out to get into a line breaker position. Let's see what the Grandmaster and the Librarian can do to bolster themselves in Grey Knight Psychic phase, turn 5. End of Grey Knight Psychic phase, turn 5, and unfortunately for the Librarian and the Grandmaster, it was the Paladins who had the Hammerhand power. Neither of them has it, so they have contented themselves with the Grandmaster putting Sanctuary on both of them, and in all likelihood they're going to concentrate their attacks on the Burners. That combat has become a lot more tricky, but let's see what the Grey Knights do in Grey Knight shooting phase, turn 5. End of Grey Knight shooting phase, turn 5, and there was no shooting at all as the 3 remaining purifiers sprint across the inner yard of this landing facility. They are trying to get to the aid of their Librarian and their Grandmaster. Meanwhile, the hovering Storm Raven has hovered over into a line breaker position near this gantry. This assault is very close. It could go either way as we go into Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 5. End of Grey Knight's assault phase, turn 5, and the Librarian and the Grandmaster managed to slay a burner boy apiece. In return, the burners once again could not penetrate the mighty Terminator armour, and the one wound inflicted by the killer cans on the Grandmaster was saved on a 3+ invulnerable thanks to his Iron Halo combined with Sanctuary. That result proved too much for the two remaining burners. They have finally given up and fled. The Librarian and the Grandmaster remain locked in combat with the killer cans. The Orks only have the killer cans and the returning Blitzer Bomber. Let's see what they can do in Orks turn 5. End of Orks movement phase turn 5, and the Blitzer Bomber is back. The Orks know that if these Purifiers can make it into this assault, that will surely spell the end of the killer cans, as they do have hammer hands. So this pilot is going to try to gun them all down. Meanwhile, the two remaining burners have failed to rally and they continue to fall back. And that's about it as we go into Orks shooting phase turn 5. End of Orks shooting phase turn 5, and this Blitzer Bomber pilot has really been excellent throughout this battle. With a very accurate strafing run, he has cut down 2 out of the 3 Purifiers. That is a great result. Can the killer cans do something similar? Let's see. Orks assault phase turn 5. End of Ork assault phase turn 5, and neither the crack grenade planted by the Grandmaster nor the Nemesis force stave of the Librarian could make any impact on the 2 killer cans. In return, they managed to get a single wounding hit, and it got through. The Grandmaster's 3+ save. The killer cans have wounded him and they have won the combat by 1, but these Grey Knights refuse to flee. This has been a good turn for the Orks, and we have rolled. We are going into Grey Knights turn 6. End of Grey Knight's movement phase turn 6, and the last Purifier is moving as quickly as possible to charge in to the killer cans to aid the Librarian and the Grandmaster. Meanwhile, the only other movement came from the Storm Raven that has flown over the fleeing burner boys and is preparing to unleash its weaponry to try and shoot down the pesky Ork Blitzer Bomber. Let's see if this Purifier can summon up Hammerhand in Grey Knight Psychic phase turn 6. End of Grey Knight Psychic phase turn 6, and with 10 warp charge dice available, the Grandmaster used 5 of them to successfully summon Sanctuary on himself and the Librarian, and the last remaining Purifier used the other 5 to give himself Hammerhand. Now all he has to do is make his charge. But first we have the Storm Raven attempting to shoot down the Blitzer Bomber in Grey Knight shooting phase turn 6. End of Grey Knight shooting phase turn 6, and the Blitzer Bomber elected not to jink when it was targeted by the Storm Raven. The pilot is hoping that the last Purifier does not make it into combat and that he can gun him down with a strafing run next turn. In the end, it turned out to be the right decision, as the Storm Raven did not manage to get a single hit on the Ork Flyer. It is all about the assault as we go into Grey Knight's assault phase turn 6. End of Grey Knight's assault phase turn 6, and the Grandmaster managed to successfully plant a crack grenade on one of the killer cans, which caused a penetrating hit, but it was the charging Purifier that got the job done. With his 3 attacks, he managed to inflict a glance and 2 penetrating hits, and that resulted in the destruction of the killer cans. And that brings Grey Knight's turn 6 to a close, and we are calling the game here. The Orks, they still have the Blitzer Bomber, but the only other unit they have left are the 2 fleeing burner boys. They require insane courage to regroup. The Grey Knights, they have apprehended the heretic. That's worth 3 points. They also managed to get a point for Slay the Warlord thanks to the death of the Warbike riding war boss, and they've got another point thanks to the Storm Raven being in a line breaker position. They have 5 victory points in total. The Orks only managed the one for first blood. The final score is 5 points to the Grey Knights and 1 point to the Orks. It is a victory for the Knights of Titan, but at what what cost? We cannot believe the carnage during the early turns of this game. It just goes to show what happens when one army drops down right on top of the other at the start of the game. But that is always a lot of fun as well. The Grey Knights hardly have any forces left themselves. They've only got their Grandmaster, their Librarian, one Purifier and a badly damaged Storm Raven. So the Orcs can feel proud. They have inflicted a crippling blow on the Knights of Titan. But the Knights have done their sworn duty. I would not like to be this heretic being returned to the Grey Knights strike cruiser. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and we will keep producing as many Warhammer 40,000 battle reports as we can. See ya!